In this lesson, we will review two sample exercises. In this review, we will see the grading aspects, samples with mistakes, and finally, we will compare the samples with mistakes to the ideal samples. The grading aspects that we will use to review the samples with mistakes are for content, so that is what you say, and language, that is how you say it. For content, we will review the execution of the exercise, so that is, did this person understand the question and give an applicable answer, and the clearness and understandability, so is there a good structure of the answer. And for language, we will be looking at grammar, we will look at vocabulary, and finally, we will also look at the pronunciation and the fluency. Alright, so now that we have the grading aspects fresh in our mind, I think we are ready to review the first sample of an exam question. So the question here is: wat voor kleren draagt u het liefst? Vertel ook waar u die koopt. Meaning, which kind of clothes do you prefer to wear? Also tell where you buy them. You will now first hear the sample and then you will also see the text. When you see the text of the sample, I would like you to pause the video and see if you can find any mistakes in the sample. Here comes the sample.
Ik draag jurken het liefst. Ik koop dit kleren in het winkelcentrum.
So now pause the video and see if you can find any mistakes. So, did you find any mistakes? If you did, great. Otherwise, no problem. This sample is in fact not that bad, so there were not so many mistakes. But let's have a look at the ideal samples, so we can after that we can compare the ideal samples to the sample. So here's the first ideal sample.
Ik draag het liefst een joggingsbroek en een t-shirt. En ik koop deze kleren bij de H&M.
Now the second ideal sample.
Ik draag het liefst wollen sokken. Ik koop mijn sokken online.
Alright, so now that we have heard the ideal samples and the sample itself, I think we are ready to start reviewing the sample using the grading aspects. So let's start with the content. In the right top of the screen, you can see the content and the specific aspects of content, which are execution and clearness and understandability. So let's look at the execution first. So the first question, wat voor kleren draagt u het liefst? Which kind of clothes do you prefer to wear? The answer to that question is: ik draag jurken het liefst. And here there is a small issue in the grammar, but we're not looking at grammar now. We're looking at the execution of the exercise. So did this person understand the question and did she choose a correct answer to it? And I think ik draag jurken het liefst. I can easily see that she wants to say I prefer to wear dresses, which is a perfectly fine answer to this question. Then the second part of the question is: vertel ook waar u die koopt. Also tell where you buy them. Well, she says, ik koop dit kleren in het winkelcentrum. Again, not perfectly correct grammar-wise, but I can easily see that she wants to say, I buy these clothes in the shopping mall, which is a perfectly fine answer to the second part of the question. So execution is all good, and for clearness and understandability, I also think this was a good exercise. The sample is good, it's all clear, understandable, and structured, so the content is fine. Then now let's have a look at the language side. And when we look at the language side, we're first going to check the vocabulary. And to be honest, when I look at the vocabulary in this answer, I think that it's all perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. There are no mistakes and the words have been chosen correctly, so that's all fine. But there were some issues in the grammar. Some small issues, but there were some issues. So let's have a look at that. So the first issue is in the word order. And that is in the first sentence where this person says, ik draag jurken het liefst. And it should be, ik draag het liefst jurken. Het liefst should come straight after the verb, just like you see in the ideal samples where you see ik draag het liefst. You see, het liefst is immediately after the verb. So there we can learn from the ideal samples that this should be coming straight after the verb draag. Then there's also a mistake with demonstrative. And that is in the second sentence of the answer, where she says, ik koop dit kleren in het winkelcentrum. And kleren is plural. So that means that the dit should actually be deze, as we can see in the sample, in the ideal sample. So there we can see that we learn from the ideal sample that the correct demonstrative with kleren is deze, because kleren is a plural word. Except for these mistakes, this was there was not much wrong with the answer. So now let's move on to the pronunciation and the fluency. And in the pronunciation, I heard a small mistake. I think the fluency was all completely fine, but let's listen one more time to the sample to see if we can hear the pronunciation error.
Ik draag jurken het liefst. Ik koop dit kleren in het winkelcentrum.
Okay, so there was a small mistake there, and this mistake was not made in the first ideal sample. So let's listen to that one and see what the difference is.
Ik draag het liefst een joggingsbroek en een t-shirt. En ik koop deze kleren bij de H&M.
So in the ideal sample, this person said ik koop, yeah? And in the sample exercise, this person said ik koop. So double O is not pronounced koop, but it's pronounced koop, like in the ideal sample. So in this exercise, we saw that there were actually 2 grammar mistakes and 1 pronunciation mistakes, but other than that, there was not so much wrong with it. In fact, this was not such a bad sample. There were a couple of small mistakes, but overall it was okay. So now let's have a look at the second sample and review that one. Now, the second sample question is: reist u liever met de trein of met de auto? Vertel ook waarom. Meaning, do you prefer to travel by train or by car? Also tell why. You will now first hear the sample and then you will also see the text. When you see the sample text, I would like you to pause the video and see if you can find any mistakes in the sample. Here comes the sample.
Ik reis met de trein liever, want ik vind auto niet lekker.
You can now pause the video and look for mistakes. Now let's listen to the ideal samples. The first ideal sample goes as follows.
Ik reis liever met de trein, want ik houd niet van auto's.
The second ideal sample.
Ik reis liever met de auto, omdat ik autorijden fantastisch vind.
The third ideal sample.
Ik reis liever met de auto. Ik vind autorijden leuk.
As you can see, we have 3 ideal samples here. And the reason that there are so many is that the question was with waarom, meaning why. And there are different ways that you can answer a waarom question. You can answer a waarom question with the conjunction want, meaning because, or the conjunction omdat, also meaning because. They mean the same, but there is a difference in structure, because if you use want, then the sentence after want will keep the normal order of a normal sentence. And when you use omdat, then the sentence after omdat will get a different order. So want is in fact the more easy choice, but you can learn about the difference between want and omdat in the grammar section and also in the lesson about waarom questions. Then there's also a third option, and that is the last one. So you could say here, ik reis liever met de auto, ik vind autorijden leuk. Meaning I prefer to drive a car, I like driving a car. So first he says what he prefers and then why he prefers that without using a conjunction, but still it's a perfectly fine and structured answer. So you don't necessarily have to use the conjunctions if your answer is still clear and structured. Now let's go back to the sample and now let's review the sample using the grading aspects. And in the top right corner, you'll see the grading aspects for content, which are execution and clearness and understandability. Now let's look at the execution first. So the first question in this sample was, reist u liever met de trein of met de auto? Meaning, do you prefer to travel by train or by car? And the answer to that question is, ik reis met de trein liever. Meaning, I prefer to travel by train. It's not grammatically all perfect, but the content is fine, so that's good. For execution, the first part of the question is fine. And then the second part of the question is, vertel ook waarom. Also tell why. And the answer was, want ik vind auto niet lekker. It's not all correct and the choice of words is not so good, but still I can understand that this person wants to say that she doesn't like cars, that she's not so fond of cars. So I would say for the execution of the exercise, this is fine and it passes, and the clearness and understandability is also okay. There is a nice use of the conjunction want, so this person understood that that's what you do when the question is with waarom, with why, you can answer it with want. So I would say for content, this is fine, and we can move on to the language part of the grading. So for the language part, let's start with the vocabulary. And in the second part of the sample answer, she says, ik vind auto niet lekker. And lekker is an adjective, but it's not an adjective that we would use in combination with the auto. You wouldn't say it in combination with a car. Lekker is an adjective that you use in combination with the weather, with food, or how you feel. So in this case, the person could have said, ik vind de auto niet leuk, because leuk means nice or fun. So that would have been all right. But lekker is not the correct choice for a car. Lekker is really for how you feel, for food, and for the weather. Yeah, so that would have been a better choice. Another way to say that she liked cars, she could have also said, like in the first ideal sample, we learned that you can also say, ik houd van auto's. Ik houd niet van auto's, meaning I don't like cars. Ik houd van auto's without the niet would mean I like cars. Ik houd niet van auto's is I don't like cars. So when we move on and look at the grammar part, we can see that in the first part of the answer, ik reis met de trein liever, there is a word order mistake. So there we see that the word liever, just like het liefst in the last sample that we looked at, liever has to be after the verb. So it should be ik reis liever met de trein. And we can see in all the ideal samples that is exactly the order that was used. You see that liever comes straight after the verb in all the ideal samples. Ik reis liever met de trein, ik reis liever met de auto, ik reis liever met de auto. Yeah, so liever should be straight after the verb. Then there is one more mistake in the grammar, and that mistake is in the plural. And this is in the second part of the sentence, where she says, ik vind auto niet lekker. And if you say, ik vind auto without an article, then you have to put auto in the plural. So it should be like in the first ideal sample with apostrophe s to make the plural. Ik vind auto's niet, ik houd niet van auto's, I don't like cars. So if this person would have said in the second sentence, ik vind auto's niet leuk, then that would have been fine. But she needs to put an apostrophe s at the end of auto. So that was the last grammar mistake. Now let's see if there's anything wrong with the pronunciation and the fluency. So let's listen to the sample one more time.
Ik reis met de trein liever, want ik vind auto niet lekker.
Well, the pronunciation was all good and the fluency in fact was also perfect.